Welcome back to the BizMafia Podcast, where business gets made. I'm joined always by the brains and beauty of the operation, Pat Linden. Pat, how are you?
Good. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate that. I appreciate that recognition.
That's long overdue, right? Well, today we're excited to welcome Michael Wamsganz to the show. Michael is the esteemed president and CEO of Citywide Banks, a division of HTLF Bank. He joined Citywide Banks in April of 2020 as the director of commercial banking, bringing a wealth of experience from both commercial and consumer banking segments. Before this role, Michael's held various leadership positions at prestigious institutions such as Huntington National Bank, Bank of the West, where he and I have history, U.S. Bank, and Citywide Bank. In addition to his financial services career, Michael's also an entrepreneur at heart, owning a wine and wedding venue that promises unforgettable experiences. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. That's a nice opening.
Well, I've known you for a number of years, and I was really excited to get you on the show. You've always had great insights on leadership, intertwining paths of banking and entrepreneurship, and you're navigating not just the personnel side of the business, but working through innovative strategies for business growth. And so I was really excited to get you on here to share your knowledge with the audience. There's a lot to dive into, but first, let's just start with what got you into banking.
What got me into banking? Well, I back in my senior year down at Southeast Missouri, down in Cape Girardeau, I had met a mentor at Citicorp Mortgage. Their home base was in St. Louis, and a gentleman by the name of Rob Gimbel. He and I became really, really good friends, and he mentored me through my last year of college. And I went through a transition between baseball and college, and my dad said I need to go get a real job. So we migrated over into banking. And I had Rob actually took me out to New York City for an interview with Citicorp. And there I was, a Midwest kid, having never really been to the East Coast, let alone New York City, going out there for my first interview. And lo and behold, I made it through the first round of interviews. And next thing you know, I'm sitting at 399 Park Avenue, as a young kid moving into banking. So I feel like that was that old Michael J. Fox movie where he was going into the city. That's how I was. I was a Midwest kid, never saw a building that tall before. And here we are.
That's great. And then where did that take you? Now, what was the position you started at first?
So I entered into Citicorp under the treasury management functions, and it was a combination of designing and training on the TM platforms for Citicorp, as well as the risk management side of the house. So it was really twofold, because Citicorp at the time was one of the largest international banks. I think we were roughly in about 135 countries, I think, roughly at the time. And so the movement of money and the online banking platforms back in the late 80s, early 90s was just really starting to up and come. And so it was educating Asia Pacific to Europe to Latin America, and basically cross-training each of the regions on the TM platforms, and then the risks associated to the payment networks that all those platforms tied into.
That's great. That's where you probably got a little bit more of a taste for, like you said, the risk management aspect, right? And that would eventually transition over to commercial lending. So how did you make the jump? And sorry, you're going to say something there.
Yeah, good question. I mean, making the jump, once I left, so I was at Citi, I left Citi and went over to U.S. Bank. And I was based in Minneapolis, working with a gentleman by the name of Jeff Jones, who was running the TM group for U.S. Bank at the time. And I was on the product development and risk management side. And really, I was one of the product people that would go out on calls with the commercial bankers. So I would go out in my product role as an expert to go out and meet with commercial clients with the RMs, and did that for a handful of years. And really, you get a taste of that, and you're now out of the office and you're sitting down hearing the stories of a company, and that excited me. And so really made that transition into a business banking director's role. Actually, with U.S. Bank, they moved me from Minneapolis down to St. Louis, and so then I took on business banking for St. Louis, Chicago, and Milwaukee. And that was the transition. That jumped me into the sales world.
Yeah, I've always known you as a pretty gregarious, outgoing guy, someone who asks a lot of thoughtful questions. So I'm sure risk management, you probably weren't long for it for 20 years, but it was certainly a great experience and background for you that I know applied further down the line.
I think the risk management side of it becomes very important because over on the commercial banking side, yes, it's sales related, but you also need to look at the risk aspects of working with a commercial company, whether it's fraud or it could be check kiting, it could be wire fraud, ACH, and really having that umbrella that takes a look at not just sales, but sales, operations, and risk, I think gives you a better overview when you're working with companies.
So, Mike, most of our listeners are small business owners, entrepreneurs. What's kind of from the mouth of a commercial banker? What, in your experience, what are sort of the lending attributes? What do you look at? What is standard sort of checklist? These assets exist. We can collateralize that. Cash flow, ratio analysis versus we're really going to take a leap of faith, get behind this person and everything in between. What's that look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. As you stated, yes, we're going to look at cash flows. We're going to look at the credit score of the business / the individual. But really, it gets down to a trust factor as well. And what type, if it's a startup, what type of experience does that ownership have? Do they have experience within a certain industry or a related industry? So what do they have an understanding of what they're getting into? That's number one. Now, if it's an existing company, then you're going to look at what the prior year's cash flow looks like. What does the balance sheet and the income statement? What's the leverage of the company? But really, we as a banker, you're going to look at the character of the customer, and again, build a trust factor. And I think that goes both ways. I think the customer is really interviewing the bank as well, and is the bank there to add value to them? And I really like the relationship where it's a two-way street. Yes, we're interviewing the customer, we're looking at their financials, we're looking at, is this somebody we want to bank? But on the other hand, too, I really appreciate when the customer looks at the organization, the bank, and looks at the strength and the stability. It looks at the character of the organization. It looks at can I trust my banker? Are they going to add value to me? And so to me, it's a two-way street. But again, you've got the straight financials that we all are aware of, but then it gets back to the trust and the character of that borrower or borrowers.
Great. So outside of some of the things you just went through, how else do you differentiate as a commercial institute, right? Because I think a lot of banks can say that they're all the same, but I've known you to focus on differentiation. What are some other things that you think set your financial institute apart from others?
When I work with the team, it's a question that I always want to ask is, how are we going to add value? What type of insights are you going to bring to that company? And do your homework and be prepared. Don't go into a meeting with a new prospect and feel like that everybody has their elevator speech. I get that, but don't go in and talk 80% of the time. You should go in and talk 20% of the time and listen 80% of the time, because you should have done your homework. You should understand what the industry is. And for example, over the years, and a question that just drives me crazy is you'll get a banker that will go into a meeting and they will ask the owner, well, what keeps you up at night? Okay. By asking that question, you've immediately just wasted 30 minutes of that owner's time, because you don't know who they are. You don't know what industry they're in. You've not done your homework, and you've not come prepared.
That's so funny, because that's like an overused question in general, right? I mean, how many sales pitches have we had that are what keeps you up at night?
Right. And so really, Brian, back to your question, it's, my expectation is that you're going to walk into that meeting and really have done your homework on that company and understand what the industry trends are, and maybe potentially what are some of the risks within those industries. And getting back to that whole risk conversation, because it's not just about banking risk, it's about risk within that industry of whatever company you're talking to, and really challenging them with a question of, here's what we understand and see as the risks within whatever industry you're in. How are you and your leadership team managing that?
So, Mike, I want to jump in on that a little bit. You talked about experience and also character of the bank. You and I talked previously about that. We'll get more into that distinguishment between this bank, that bank. Us lay people, banks seem like a commodity, right? To a degree. We know that's not the case when you're on the inside of it, but talk to us a little bit more about experience and character of a small business that you believe can be a good borrower, not a public company or whatever. Let's get into what you mean by experience, what you like, what are the attributes? Same thing with character.
I would say with a small business, cash flow is king. I mean, we have to look at and understand, where is the money coming from? What product or service is that company offering? And then also too, as a small business, we've always said left pocket is right and right is left. So if you're a small business, your personal is typically tied into that pretty close. So, not just from the business side, but how have you handled yourself from a personal standpoint related to, whether your credit card debt or your home mortgage, or what play toys do you have as far as boats or whatever it might be? Are you a car individual? And so how has that business owner balanced the personal side of their life as well as their business side, because they are mixed together? And a red flag, let's say, is a business that has to distribute or take all of the money out every year, and retained earnings within the company are very low because they need it to be able to fund their lifestyle. So the question then becomes, if the music per se stops and the business slows down, how does that impact the personal? Because that would then impact our business lending. And so, that's an example of when we look at the overall, the whole umbrella of a company, both of those channels, I'll say, from an underwriting perspective, have a lot of weight for us.
Makes a lot of sense. So one of the things that, with your experience, Mike, I think is really interesting is you've done it all. You've come from the ground up. We all know a lot of commercial bankers. It's a high touch, relationship driven sort of business, right? We talked previously about the difference between a street banker and sort of where you're at now, which is looking at the whole picture. In fact, Citywide is owned by a public company. So the question that I've got for you is, one of the things you'd mentioned was not every deal is a good deal. So how do you balance that in managing your bankers who they've got to originate deals for the bank, for themselves, against, is this the right deal for us, and distinguishing between, good and in between and bad customers and so forth?
That's a great question, because that's a balancing act between myself, our commercial, I'll say on the commercial banking side, my commercial leadership team, as well as the bankers, because we are not the bank for every customer. And, from a coachability standpoint from a banker, and that's actually, it's interesting, as we're recruiting bankers, you're trying to recruit great individuals who are willing to be part of a team, but they also are coachable, because every bank is different. And you have to look at the culture of the institution. And I'll use Citywide, but then I'll use just say community banks in general over the past number of years. We're typically very transactional. A lot of community banks were very real estate focused. As banks like Citywide, as we became part of the HTLF family over the last number of years, the culture shifted from what grew up here in this Denver market as a, let's say, real estate focused bank. We've moved into, over the last few years, a relationship based bank. And that relationship is, you look at the weighting of real estate versus non-real estate. We are more now, I'll call it C&I, manufacturing, equipment focused. We still do our real estate, but it's a balance between the two. And that's an interesting transition of, can local/community banks make that transition? Because typically the bankers that have been within that institution over years are probably very heavy real estate focused. And that was a transition that we had to make here when I took on this role in 2020, right as we were entering COVID, was that transition from real estate focus only to that C&I manufacturing equipment operating company focus, and move to about a 60-40, 70-30, call it C&I to real estate focus. And that's a big transition for organizations, but that then gets to the leadership of, can they recruit individuals that are coachable and that want to learn, because not everybody is the best C&I banker, but that's something, do they have the ability to learn, and are they coachable? And if they are, and we have the right leadership team in place, which we do, then we can help train and build that out for those individuals.
A few questions. How hard is it to find seasoned experts that are coachable?
That is, that's something actually I just had a conversation with my head of commercial today, Sean McGough, on looking at pipeline of individuals, because really you just don't interview and go out and try to recruit when you have a job opening. You need to be recruiting every single day, every week. And that's something that I challenge myself as well as my leaders to go out and meet new bankers, whether, we're in Denver here. So whether it's from PNC or Wells Fargo or US Bank or BMO or wherever it might be from, but get out, have a cup of coffee, go out and ask questions. How's it going at that bank? What's happening? Denver's a big town, but it's small. I think we all kind of know each other, and we hear what's going on in organizations. So I think really recruiting, it's an ongoing process. It never stops. So just as you have a pipeline of commercial customers as a banker for deal volume in your pipeline, we as leaders also have a pipeline of customers. And a great way to find those bankers out on the street is talk to your customers. You ask the question, who are the best bankers that have come in to call on your business? And I'll tell you, about 70% of the time, that individual will open their desk drawer and pull out a business card and say, hey, here, I was impressed with this individual. Why don't you give them a call?
And when you're impressed with that, and when they are, customers impressed with the individual, do you also find that maybe they're a good cultural fit, that those two things seem to go hand in hand?
Typically they do. Yeah. Versus you'll get that banker that just comes in and again talks for 80% of the time. That customer that we're then sitting in front of, they will basically say, well, they didn't ask me those questions. We literally had this conversation 2 weeks ago with a very large, they produce farm equipment and cattle fencing and stuff here. They're based in Denver. And the bank that they are currently with, banker just wants to talk about numbers. They don't even want to talk about how the business has grown and how's the family doing. There's no personal relationship there. And frankly, we met them. We got introduced. We were out at the National Rodeo out in Las Vegas about a month ago with one of our good customers. And that customer actually took us by and went over to the booth to introduce us to that company and said, hey, this is my bank. You guys should meet with them. And that's how it started.
Mike, from a customer service standpoint, if you've got a client that's servicing the debt and they're doing everything they need to financially, talk to us about what the difference is, though, in terms of keeping that customer and what a commercial banker does after the fact in those instances. We know that commercial bankers come in after they've originated the loan if the customer's in trouble, or maybe there's touch points, or maybe they're trying to sell additional products. But what really distinguishes a great commercial banker on a long-term basis with a client that is able and paying from somebody who's average? I'm
going to go back to the story that I just talked about, because that was a big piece of this. This prospects, when we sat down with the ownership, and this company's been in business for over 65 years. One of the things they said to us is, we only see our banker about once every 2 years when our line comes due. They never stop by. They never just come in to drop in, have a cup of coffee, and just talk. And it's really about building a true relationship. And, you as a banker, who your top 20, 25, 30 customers are. Part of your role is to ensure that you're just staying in touch with them, because things change, right? You want to be in a position, you want that relationship. If that company's wanting and thinking about making an acquisition or thinking about growing and maybe moving into a different vertical or whatever it might be. You want to be the first person they're calling. You want to be that trusted advisor for that company. A good company is always going to have a great accountant. They're always going to have an incredible attorney, and they should have a solid banker. It's a three-legged stool. And you want to be one of those phone calls that customer is going to make before they, if they're making a decision to grow or whatever it might be, to say, hey, here's what we're thinking. Mike, you and Citywide, you and HTLF, what do you think?
Another question more on the customer side of things, Mike. What you gave some great advice earlier where there's overlap between personal lifestyle habits and the way customers run their business, and they're intertwined, to your point. So you look at that from an underwriting standpoint. If you've got customers that are very focused on their business and trying to do the right things and largely doing the right things, what are some tips for what you see? Here is what makes the most profitable businesses, their systems, whatever that it does, whatever they do, cash management, what makes all things considered, where you've got a focused and solidly run company, the best customers, and what's some of the advice for what small businesses should do that you see, because you've seen probably thousands of deals and thousands of customers at this point in your career?
I would break that down into a handful of different categories. Number one, what's the financial resilience of that company, right? Are they prioritizing stability through their cash flow management, as we just talked about? How do they manage their expenses? And are they continually looking for opportunities for additional revenue streams? So the financial resilience side, I would say, what's their online presence, right? I mean, being online is a big deal. And how does that company manage that? What's their customer engagement? Are they focusing on building and maintaining a very strong customer relationship through personalized communications, like I talked about before, by stepping in? What type of loyalty program do they have? And again, you just can't say we're going to have exceptional customer service. That's just table stakes. Everybody has to have that. But they, as a company, how are they creating a wow factor and demonstrating how they differentiate themselves from the competition? And then, frankly, like I do with my team here, are they listening and asking their team on how are they adding value? So is that customer engagement, is that ingrained down through the company? Adaptability, I think it's really important that they as a business owner need to understand the industry trends. Sustainability, do they have practices that resonate with the environmental conscious consumers? That's a big deal in today's environment. Is that a focus? And then from a technology standpoint, are they staying abreast? Do they have the technology that can even communicate with the bank? And then lastly, what's, from a risk perspective, what's the contingency planning that company has? And, do they have, we saw it during COVID, do they have contingency plans for unexpected downturns? And we saw that within the supply chains. And then you also see that during, changing political environments. And we did see companies that flourished during COVID because they did have contingency plans. And we had others that fell apart because they hadn't managed their inventory, so they couldn't get glass bottles or whatever it was, and it just basically took their company down. So we did, so when I look at what are the other things we as a bank, I as a banker, I'm looking. Those would be key points that, outside of just the straight financials, balance sheet, income statement, leverage type conversations.
So piggybacking off of that Pat's earlier question, what about the deals that maybe at first glance look really good and attractive, but based on your experience, you end up passing on because of said issue or characteristic or flaw, whatever it is? Do you have any examples of the deals that, again, at first glance look good, but you end up walking away from?
I would say a lot of those would, let's just say it's a real estate deal, right? And you look at historical cash flow and it looks really good. But then when you start to dig a little deeper, then you start to see that, you're thinking about doing, say, a 5-year deal, but then you see lease terms that are going to be, 60% of the building their leases are going to spin off the next 2.5 to 3 years, and what's the And they, as a building owner, what are they doing to re-sign those leases or go out and recruit? And that's, you look at the office space right now. That's a big conversation for banks right now. That on office building lending has slowed up because of the 30 to 40% building occupancy at this point. So while historicals look really good, and you say, okay, yeah, I could probably get that deal done. But when, from a risk perspective, I look 2 years out, what am I seeing? Or is it just an industry from a culture perspective? We as an organization, while those numbers look good and they work, just from a cultural perspective, it doesn't fit our organization.
So this goes back really to what you said earlier, is making sure your team is doing their homework, right? And being good detectives and being thoughtful.
And I think really we as leaders within the institution, from an HTLF perspective, from a Citywide perspective, we need to be consistently communicating with our bankers on what is the bottom line culture, what is our vision, what is our mission, what are our pillars, and the bankers then understand what will work and what will not work. So that way they're more efficient when they're out prospecting and looking for new relationships. So we as leaders need to be making sure that we are communicating to the bankers of kind of what's in, what's out. And you look at, I'll use like a PNC here in town. They are great at energy lending, probably one of the best in that space. So we are not big oil and gas lenders at Citywide. And so when we would run into a deal like that, then that's when you then network and hand a deal off or make an introduction to a company that's looking for lending. You would introduce them to the other bank.
So Mike, one thing you hit on that I think makes a lot of sense. We talked about, I'm in the M&A world, you're in the M&A world in your own way as well. You talked about financing acquisitions. You want to be one of the first contact points when your customers want to buy a company. And you've also talked about stability, the real estate market. Use the example of institutional buildings right now, the commercial real estate space, which is getting hit. And so that brings me to my point about the importance of sustained growth. A lot of clients that we work with on the front end that are looking at selling, for example, one of the conversations we have is, hey, what is your 2-year, 3-year history look like? How reasonable is your growth? How stable is your growth? That's really, really important. It's not only important if you want to be acquired, but it's got to be incredibly important for finding the right lender. Is that a fair point?
That's a very fair point. And actually, it's interesting. We are at a point in time where succession planning is a big deal. You have a transition from, kind of mom and dads to siblings now and to their kids. And, you have companies that are going into third and fourth generation. And then it's interesting. We've seen a trend here over the last 12 months in talking to companies where the mother and father are looking to get out of the business. They want to pass it to their kids, but their kids don't want to do the business. So now what? And so, what is your succession plan if your children do not want to take the business over? And then it's a matter of trying to identify key employees that would want to potentially continue on or looking to sell. I met with a well company a couple of weeks ago, and that was the exact conversation. Their kids did not want to continue in wells, so water wells. They drill, so not oil and gas wells, but drilling for home wells at your own property. And his kids didn't want to take the business over, so he brought 2 of his key employees in to introduce them to me as this is going to be, this will be your banker when I hand this company over to you. And so really that business working with their bank, whether it's Citywide or whatever bank they're with, making sure they're having that conversation about succession plan is a big deal.
It's a great point. One thing we talked about previously that I want to jump into a little bit with you, Mike, is you hit on it to a degree, the right customer. I'm in a customer service business or client service business, a lot of business development over the years, used to take any client basically to try to pay the bills. I know there's probably a little bit of a similar mindset with street bankers, right? I mean, fit a criteria, you want to get the business. You've now evolved into this management CEO level role. And you talked to me before about having the right customer. And it's a lot of paying customers that are not the right customer for the culture of the business long term. There's a balance there for sure. How do you manage that? Because you need the business for the numbers and so on, but there's more considerations. Take us through your thought process, your bank.
Yeah, that can become a hard conversation with bankers. And really, I think it's been unveiled. So 2023 was an interesting year for bankers. Prior, the last 10 years prior to 23, I don't want to say money was free, but it was very cheap. Interest rates were at an all-time low. And so bankers that came into the banking world, those individuals that came into the banking world over to the prior 10 years came in to an environment where, you were going to be the cheapest deal in town because money was cheap. In 23, you had 10, 11 interest rate hikes within that period of time. And you went from money being cheap to money being on par with it. If you look at the last 50 years, the interest rates that we had in 2023 were pretty much on par. If you look at the averages, the last 10 years was not normal. And that transition had to happen in customers' minds as well, because everybody felt, I should be able to start my my welding business, right? Or my HVAC business, and I'm going to buy a building and it's going to be at 2.99% fixed for 10 years. And it was an adventure taking the bankers through that mindset shift as well as customers, that this is the reality of the rates, and no, we're not going to go do, say a 5-year deal at 2.99 right now. And some customers understood that, some customers did not. If all the customer wanted to find was the cheapest money in town, then I'm probably not your bank. We had to transition through some bankers this last year because they felt that the only way they could be successful was have the lowest rate in town. And really, it's interesting because we as leaders, as we're trying to coach bankers, you had to get them to trust themselves that they had the ability to go out and add that insight, add that value, challenge the customer, because again, their accountant's not free. We know their attorney's not free. So why should their bank be free? And you as a banker, we had to basically create and help reinforce and build confidence in themselves so they could really understand their full potential. And it was interesting because we did see bankers move through that transition. We saw customers move through that transition. And really, will that customer be a good customer for Citywide, HTLF, our bank? Do they value the full relationship? If they don't value the full relationship and you're just a price shopper, we're probably not going to, again, our cultures from what they're looking for versus what our foundation is, probably not going to fit.
I think
because you had bankers and companies going through that transition this year.
What you're talking about is such a great point. You mentioned credit culture before, and your credit culture has to sync with the customer culture.
That's right. Mike, experience brings a lot of things. Certainly knowledge and pattern recognition is one of them. You've seen hard markets, you've seen soft markets. One thing I'm interested in is your area of expertise and in your industry. You've seen a lot of changes, whether it's regulation or other. How are you adjusting to these curveballs as they're thrown?
It's I would say for our bank specifically, we have a really, really good team, and we have people running financial models. I mean, look in 2024. Is our interest rates going to stay flat? Our interest rates are going to see a reduction 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. But, the team models that out from a financial perspective. I think at the end of the day, it gets down to strong communication skills, helping the bankers, and frankly, my leadership team at the HTLF level, right? Being able to communicate the vision, the why to myself to ensure that is communicated to our entire Citywide team. And then, I go out into the branches with my head of retail, and we do, kind of do it listening, right? You're out listening to your team, and you're doing that with your customers as well. but then also demonstrating empathy, because 2023 was not an easy year. Not an easy year for any bank in this market across the entire country, right? So if you have the strong communication skills, if you demonstrate listening skills, and you have empathy for your team, and I would say my leadership team had that with our bank this last year, that builds trust, and that trust is key. And so really, welcome to banking. Something's going to change every 2 to 3 years. And you either deal with and manage the change, or the change is going to manage you. But I really think it's the communication skills, it's listening, it's demonstrating empathy. Now, yes, we are a publicly traded company. We have shareholders. We have a board of directors. There's an expectation to grow. And that is communicated to me from my leadership team. And I understand what it is. And in my mind, within leadership, no word is more important than the word trust. And I think that's really what was that. Banks that did well, that made it through this last year, I would say that was part of the kind of the cultural foundation within them.
Mike, going back to that customer who's maybe in between, which I suspect you see a lot of, they maybe some banks are not going to get behind them. They don't have, they have a few opportunities, but maybe not tons. One of the things you told me before is you like a customer that's willing to be challenged. Business owners, entrepreneurs that will be challenged. Give us examples of the way in which you will challenge them to decide whether you're going to get behind them to be their bank or not.
That's a slippery slope question because if you do, okay, let's just say a company is wanting to move into they're based here in Denver, but they, Salt Lake City is a great market and they just want to get over there, right? And they just see nothing but grow. And it's interesting when I've seen companies fail. There's a couple of things that personally I always look at. Number one, are they growing too fast? Right? Is that hockey stick going straight up? What has their growth patterns been in the past? Are they biting off too more than they can chew at this point? So number one, how quick are they growing? Then I'm going to get back to, do they have on-ground expertise? they're going to go from Denver to Salt Lake. What's their knowledge of that Salt Lake market? Are they just taking their product over there? And really, are they getting too greedy? Because again, if you try to grow too fast, if you're too greedy in a sense, and you don't have a really good handle on what your true customer base is, then that gets back to that whole customer engagement and adaptability point that I made earlier. That would be an example that, we appreciate you, but we're not ready to move with you to that new state, because it's opening too much risk. Because as a bank, the last thing I want to do is own your building, try to take your company over because you've defaulted on payments. That's not what we're in the job to do. Right. So we have to be smart. And there's some companies, and I've sat with them, that, no, we're going to do this. They're going to run through that wall. I hope you're successful with it. Right. Because that's going to create too much forward exposure for us that we as an organization, as a bank, are not comfortable with. And that's a very straight conversation you have with some companies, and others. I'll use an example. It's a great company here that's based in our Denver market, Freebird Shoes. They have grown. Michael Murphy has grown that company slowly over the years. And for the first number of years, it was all self-funded. There was no bank debt within that company. He managed the company appropriately and controlled his growth. And now, from a brand perspective, they have an incredible product out there. And yes, they're expanding, whether it's out into the Long Island market or Las Vegas, or down into Nashville. Sitting with him a few weeks back, it was a very forward-looking conversation, and he respected the conversation from the bank and vice versa, because really there was, the financial resilience, as I talked earlier, that he'd created within that company is extremely strong. And what a very motivating conversation and meeting that was, because again, you see the product, and to understand what the leadership is that's driving that company, it was impressive.
You've been inspired by a lot of your clients, and somewhere along the line, you got bitten by the entrepreneurial bug yourself. Tell us a little bit more about this transition into your own business, the wedding and wine venue, or business, I should say. Where did this itch come from? When did it start? And then how did you all of a sudden blink and now you're in business?
It started with my wife, Tiffany, and her sister, Lindsay, back in 2016. We we've got a large property here in Denver that we started to Airbnb it, and then her sister approached us and said, you should, she was in the wedding rental business. And she said, yeah, you should think about hosting weddings at your property. Like, okay, I hadn't really thought about that before, but I guess, we all sat down and you do what you do as a family. You pour a drink, glass of wine and start talking. And next thing you know, we lay a bunch of concrete, we put gardens in, we put a big tent up, and we're doing 25 weddings a year at this Airbnb. And really working with the couples. So I like to say I'm banker by day and wine and wedding guy by weekend. That's kind of how my life rolls. But in 16, 17, that started to take off. Tiffany and Lindsay. Tiffany was the Western region CFO for Banner Health, and she had an entrepreneur spirit in her as well. And she had owned a Flight for Life helicopter company in Nebraska and Eastern Colorado. And so she'd worked in the large corporate, but she had an entrepreneur spirit to her as well. And really having the ability to help Lindsay and Tiffany as sisters come together to follow their passion, that's how this thing started. And really it became a family-driven business. So the wedding business really started back in 17. In 2020, it was interesting. As a banker, as a business owner at the time, you then start to look at what's the market disruption that's going on. Well, we hit COVID. Well, that everybody went into lockdown, masks, social distancing, restaurants were closed, everybody was moving out into streets. But you know what? Everybody still is going to get married. So you start to look at what is the disruption out in the market? And we said, you know what? So the banker in me said, okay, so we're gonna think about growing, and we're going to think about investing in a social gathering, i.e. wedding business, where people are going to come together and all be under the same roof in the middle of COVID. Well, the entrepreneur said, and me said, there probably is going to be some deals out there. And sure enough, we started to go out and look, and we did find a property in northern Colorado up in Fort Collins that had been shut down in COVID. So now the banker in me said, well, okay, now you're going to look at the financials and the cash flow, and can you afford this? And as we analyzed our personal side and our business, we said, yes, we can afford this. Now the entrepreneur in me said, well, now you're going to buy this thing at half price, because COVID's going to have to go. It's going to go away at some point, or the world's going to come to an end, right? So it was an interesting time. And yes, we rolled the dice a little bit, but we did purchase this property, which then had a winery tied to it. And people asked me, well, did you know how to make wine? Well, I did not. I know how to drink it. I know what wine tastes good to me. I didn't know how to make it. But the interesting thing is, as you peel the onion back, well, CSU had actually planted the vineyard 10 years ago. CSU had actually, the fermentation department actually helped develop the production room within this winery. And so Tiffany she's a CSU alum, has a great relationship. And now as a business owner, now it's about building a team. So we approached the fermentation department at CSU and said, hey, can we work with you? They said, absolutely. So now you've got one of the largest agricultural schools 10 minutes from your property. You're going to partner with them. And it's a win-win, because, and I don't like to say win-win, it's good for both, because it's providing students that are in the fermentation and viticulture departments real life experience working with our winery. So now they're doing the pH testing and the SO2s and all of the chemical stuff that's related to the wine. And the fermentation department kids are actually utilizing what they're learning in school and actually helping blend and make wine with us. So when you think about how did we get into this, there was disruption. We identified where we could take advantage of the disruption. And that's what I consider a good trait of entrepreneurship, a trait as a leader. You have a passion. Our passion was the wedding business. We understood the customers from there, so we had a good field that we could manage this business. And then we surrounded ourselves with a very strong team. So between Tiffany and Lindsay running that business, and they keep me out of the wedding business. I'm not allowed to touch that. That's I do the wine tasting and testing and do wine blendings with the
a lot of testing, I'm sure.
yeah,
right,
I do
Mike?
a lot of testing, right? So if you have a hard day, at the bank, you just go drink some wine. But really, it's I think, and really from a banker's perspective, I think it really makes me a better banker as well, because I walk in the shoes of an entrepreneur as a business owner. Yes, I lived through COVID. We grew our business in the middle of COVID, and really we understood our numbers, because as an entrepreneur, you need to understand what your current numbers in your business are, your margins, your product profitability, what's your balance sheet look like, and are you in a position to grow? And that was the conversation that Tiffany and I had to have with a banker as we're buying this new business, this new property. And it was really interesting because I was on the other side of the table talking about my numbers, building my business plan, presenting it to a bank in the middle of COVID. And that was an interesting conversation. So I really, as a bank president and CEO and growing up in this industry for 33 years, I have an appreciation for that business owner and everything that they go through. And as they're sitting at the kitchen table, trying to make payroll, looking at what their inventory levels are and thinking about what their sales projections are going to be over the next 6 to 12 months. I feel that builds a lot, that keeps a lot of credibility with me, with that business owner, because a lot of people know my story. They know we're in this business. But from a banker's perspective, I think it really helps me engage with them on a more personal level.
Yeah. And to that point, you've got a wealth of knowledge and experience in your own industry. You're an entrepreneur. Are there any lessons you learned through the growth of this business that you said, you know what, maybe I didn't realize it when I was in the commercial banking side?
Yeah, I think Brian, that's a great question. And that's an easy question for me. It's when you think of partnerships, and you think of partnerships with key vendors, whether it's a supplier for you or what it might be, but the partnership with nonprofits within your community, and then also truly understanding, is the community, is the county that you have your business in, are they business friendly? And that the whole political side of this, one thinks you have a great product, you have a great service, but then, and you can do it, and you can be successful, but it's the outside influences that tend to make it hard for some businesses. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I work with Aurora, and you look at the city council of Aurora, they put in place 2 years ago something called their red tape process. The chamber and city council are looking at if I as a business are coming in, what are all the things, what are all the permits, what are all the things that I have to do to get my business license there to get up and running. This Aurora, from a red tape process, is looking at what do we have to have versus what we really want. And they're cutting the red tape process, making it easier for businesses to be successful within their community. I will then look at the city of Thornton. I will call out Jan Coleman, who's the mayor of Thornton, and Adam Kruger, who is the city of Thornton's economic development individual. They're out recruiting businesses to come to Thornton because they've been able to connect the dots to say, if a business is successful, our community will be successful. They're tied hand in hand. And Thornton and Aurora have done a great job promoting and being very business friendly, versus I'll say Northern Colorado sometimes is not as business friendly and does make it difficult. So as a business owner, trying to understand what the political environment is that you're in. And that's a question then that over the last couple of years, I've now built that into my conversation with companies. And it's interesting. I do talk to companies and they'll say, yeah, we don't service that area. We don't go there because getting permitting, trying to build something within that area has become too difficult. And so I think that's something that I've learned that I didn't have I don't think I had a really great appreciation for it until the last couple of years, because now, and then it gets back to, when I said surrounding yourself with a great accountant, a great banker, but then also having an attorney that's willing to go to the mat for you too, because sometimes the conversations, with local government can be very difficult, which is unfortunate, but it's just a matter of fact.
Mike, so a little bit, seems like Denver, you mentioned that all of us that have kind of been here, certainly yourself, it's a big, small town, but it really feels like to me in the last 10 years or so, Denver has really taken off. You've seen a lot more technology businesses come here. I feel like you go downtown, kind of get the feeling it's a little more cultured, if you will. Sometimes when I would go through Denver, I felt like there's a little bit of a New York, Chicago feeling here or whatever. Or is that sort of your perspective as well with the Denver metropolitan area? And it seems like a lot of businesses are coming here. It seems like a really exciting time for us that are in business, a great place to be.
It is. You look at Denver in general, right? You've got DIA, which is one of the 10th largest airports in the world. You've got I-70 coming right through. So from a transportation perspective, this is a great hub. And really, I joke, I come out of the Midwest, right? I come out of St. Louis, where you don't want to be there June, July, August, September, because humidity levels are just horrid. And it is what it is. But the weather patterns here in the Colorado market, I think, are very strong. They're, you're the fifth sunniest city in the country. So you have that energy level. And I do think being where with the size of DIA, the transportation hub, yes, that does attract businesses here. Then also to look at your universities, between CU, CSU, DU. I mean, you have a world-class law school here. You've got the Space Center down south now. You've got you have the military presence here. So you have a lot of a feeder pool for people to hire. And then also too, just I mean, you can be in the mountains, you can go skiing and play golf on the same day, right? So there's advantages to living here. Now, obviously we all understand the cost of living and housing and things like that. And to me, what's happening now, that's now pushing Denver outside of Denver, and it's helping it grow. I heard and I've seen where I think Greeley up kind of northeastern Colorado is like the fifth largest city growing in the country right now, because it's becoming a bedroom community for Denver. And you look at the investment in I-25 moving north with the HOV lane. So the state is doing, I think, a really good job of bringing money back into making transportation, between the train going out to the airport and things like that. The infrastructure here is really strong. And then also too, I sit on the board of directors for the Chamber of Commerce. Between the Downtown Denver Partnership and the Chamber of Commerce out recruiting companies to come in to the Denver market, that's a very strong outward forward-looking leadership role that both those organizations are taking to try to help the Colorado market grow in general. So I think there's a lot of things that are attracting people to come to Denver. And from a banking perspective, that's a good thing for us.
One last question here. I know we want to touch on a few other things, but when I first moved out here, Mike, it was close to about 15 years ago. And there were certain industries we were heavy in, and we've since diversified. What industries do you think will grow that maybe are a small percentage today, or what industries maybe we haven't considered you think will boom here in the state of Colorado in particular?
I think the technology, I think with the space program here, I think we'll continue to see the technology side of the house continue to grow in Colorado. I would say healthcare you look at the healthcare presence here in the Colorado market, I think that will continue to grow. The distribution, the manufacturing, and then also too, we've seen over the last year or so cold storage becoming a really big deal here in Colorado because of you have to start looking at industry trends, right? I want food delivered to my doorstep, right? And so the amount of the transportation coming into DIA and then creating those central hubs for, I'll say, cold storage to be able to move that food into the cold storage, and then it has to be out within the day to we as a consumer's doorstep, so then I can prepare my meal. So I see a lot of that, and that's all that development that's going on out around the airport. I think over the next 5 to 8 years is going to be. I think I moved here in 2006, so back then the airport, you felt like you were out in Kansas roughly, but now the bridge between where the airport is and downtown and, kind of moving, west on E470, that's all filling in. So it's fun to see all that growth out there because it's creating opportunities for folks. You've got new homes going in out there. You've got new businesses all surrounding that airport. And it's exciting to see that. And then you think about how the whole state is growing. Think about Colorado Springs. I mean, it's, at some point here, Colorado Springs and Denver are going to be connected. And really, you thought the Springs was so far away, and you look at the growth that's going on down there, it's amazing. And so I think there's a lot of good stuff happening within this Colorado market that it's changing people's lives. As I said before, if businesses are thriving, our communities should be thriving. And they're fueling each other. And that's, as a banker, that's what I see.
For sure. Colorado's a great place to be for business owners. Mike, this has been awesome. Mike Wamsganz, one of the good fellas of the banking industry. Citywide Banks, you can find if you're interested in going to their website or you're interested in a loan of some sort, check them out, citywidebanks.com. Division of HTLF Bank, which is a public company. So super, super appreciate you being here today, Mike. Very educational. And I just want to say to the audience, trying to do the best we can to bring you the best content on entrepreneurship and from dons of the various industries out there. Be sure to go follow us, give us a 5-star rating, we hope, and we'll see you next time. Before we go, Mike, BizMafia is what?
Where business gets made.
Great.
Boom.
Thanks, Mike.
No, thank you guys. I appreciate it.